there are a couple of conservatives that run different Fed branches throughout the country. Thomas Hoenig was one in Kansas City, and Richard Fisher is another one in Dallas. Now, these days, when we use the word conservative, it's kind of a misnomer. It's Republicans who have forgotten what conservative actually means, and they're nowhere near conservative. All they are is crony capitalists who just take bribes from all the different funders and then do whatever the funders want and rig the government in their favor. Those are not conservatives. Conservatives should be against that, right? Now, Richard Fisher and Thomas Hoenig are real conservatives. So what do they hate? Well, they hate when the government meddles in the private sector. And they hate it when it fixes the system so that there are no winners and losers. So, or that the government decides who the winners and losers are. Remember, conservatives are supposed to hate that, right? And Richard Fisher does. And so the Dallas Fed put out a report saying, you know what we need to do? We need to break up all of the big banks because they're too big to fail. They have perverted the system. They have captured the government. And no matter what they do and how wrong their decisions are, they never lose. And that's because it's crony capitalism. They've captured the government. They're 100% right. So let me quote from some of the report here. Quote, capitalism requires the freedom to succeed and the freedom to fail. Hard work and good decisions should be rewarded. Perhaps more important, bad decisions should lead to failure openly and publicly. Now, a lot of Republicans say that same thing, and then they turn around and go, and that's why I've given this special privilege to these top banks, which makes no sense. Now, in this case, here's a conservative saying, no, if you did not do well, you should fail. That's a very conservative position, no problem. Well, then he goes on to say the next logical thing. Quote, capitalism requires government to enforce the rule of law. This requires maintaining a level playing field. The privatization of profits and the socialization of losses is completely unacceptable. Too big to fail undermines equal treatment, reinforcing the perception of a system tilted in favor of the rich and the powerful. Bingo. That is exactly right. That should be the conservative position. By the way, it should also be the liberal position. Who's against a level playing field? But what conservatives these days have forgotten because they've been lied to for so long by Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, and their political leaders is that, of course, you need a rule of law. That's what Adam Smith said. If you don't have rule of law, well, then everybody can cheat. And then when you run a terrible business, you don't actually fail because you cheated. You bought the government officials and you put them in your back pocket. Or you've created monopolies, etc. These are all things that Adam Smith warned about. So conservatives, please find real conservative leaders like Richard Fisher and Thomas Hoenig, and guys that I don't necessarily agree with everything they say at all, but at least they come from a principled position. He goes further. He says, the perception and the reality is that virtually nobody has been punished or held accountable for their roles in the financial crisis. That's exactly right. Nobody's been punished, not under the Bush administration and not under the Obama administration. This is not a partisan thing because all the partisans, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, support the big banks. And all of us who are real citizens that get screwed over, whether we're conservatives, liberals, or moderates, we're against this system. Because when the banks failed, they were not allowed to fail. They said, no, we're going to give them $7.7 trillion in free money from the Fed. We're going to give them over $700 billion from TARP. We're going to give them back their bailouts through AIG. And they were protected under all costs because they bought the politicians, both the Republicans and the Democrats. Please, if you're a conservative, remember what your principles were supposed to be.